Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio. I'm James Spencer. This is our first podcast, one of many, we hope. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing, making beer at home. In these first episodes, we hope to give you a bit of background in home brewing, and we hope to encourage you to look into the hobby further. In this episode, we talked to longtime home brewer and homebrew store owner Andy Sparks. Andy and his father, Neil, operate the Home Brewery in Fayetteville, Arkansas. We spent some time with Andy after hours there one Saturday, sipping a beer and getting some insight into the fun and interesting hobby of homebrewing. Well, Andy, welcome. Or maybe I should thank you for welcoming us into your homebrew store today.
Well, you're always welcome here, James.
Well, thank you.
It's great to have you.
As long as I bring my checkbook, right?
That's, exactly. Our favorite customers come with their checkbook.
Andy and I have been friends. We go way back to the college days when both of us were in radio. And I stayed in radio and went into TV, and Andy wised up and went into computers and actually made a living. And we wound up coming together at Tyson Foods, I guess we can say, and worked together there in separate departments for a dozen years before, and you're still there.
I certainly am. They're still treating me pretty well, so I can't complain.
But on the side, you have the Home Brewery here in Fayetteville, Arkansas. You and your dad run the store.
Correct. We've been here for about 10 years now, and it's just my dad and me, and we enjoy doing this on the side. It's not paying the mortgage, but it's a nice hobby.
It's the love of the hobby probably that keeps you in it more
exactly.
than anything. How'd you get started?
Well, a friend of mine gave me a book on homebrewing when I was in college. Basically, when I graduated from college, The Joy of Homebrewing by Charlie Papazian.
Sort of the Bible of the homebrewer.
Exactly. And I read that book. It took me about a year and a half after reading the book to finally go out and buy the equipment, assemble some stuff for a recipe. I had the best intentions, but I was, fresh out of college working and barely able to pay my rent, and so it took me a while to get into it. But once I did, I fell in love with the hobby and obviously took it to its extreme by opening a home brew shop.
Well, what is it that you love the most? What keeps you in home brewing?
Well, part of it is all the people that you meet in homebrewing, because the homebrewing hobby attracts people from all different walks of life and economic levels. The other part is that you continue to find out that there's beers and beer styles from around the world that you've never tried or even heard of, and it's so vast. Like people that are into wines, there's so many types of wines, and but beer is just as vast, and it's just always very interesting to find new things and meet new people. And
you can make pretty much any beer that you can buy in the store.
Pretty much. Actually, the hardest beers to reproduce are some of the worst beers as far as a beer connoisseur would be concerned. Some of the dry styles and some of the lighter beer styles have to use special equipment and so forth, but all the wonderful beer styles of the world are very easy to reproduce. And with the modern home brewing techniques, you can reproduce pretty much any style in the world.
Now, as a homebrew store owner, I bet you hear all the misconceptions about the hobby.
Exactly.
What are the biggest misconceptions that you run across that people assume once they hear that you're a homebrewer or that you own a homebrew shop?
Well, we get a lot of the old bathtub myth, making it in crocks or bottles blowing up and stuff like that. But more and more we find that it's really kind of, the modern techniques have taken hold, and people are starting to really understand that it is possible to make it safely and do a very good job. The old myths of the old exploding bottles thing is pretty much doesn't happen anymore because of the way we prime, which is make the beer fizzy. We do that with a method by adding the sugar into the total volume instead of adding sugar into each bottle, which gives you more consistent regulation of the sugar across the entire batch. The other thing is that we now have good ways to keep things very sanitized, and we understand that is central to all home brewing. Is and brewing in the professional level as well, is keeping things very, very clean. That is the trick to making good quality beer and using fresh ingredients.
And why is it important to pay so much attention to sanitation?
Well, I mean, the trick to homebrewing is to bring together your ingredients, water, malt, the sugar from the barley plant, hops, flour that imparts bitterness and aroma, and yeast, the magic ingredient that turns it all into beer, and allowing it to basically, you have a controlled, in a way, a controlled spoilage. The yeast consumes the sugar and turns it into carbon dioxide and alcohol. But there's lots of other bugs in the world that like to eat sugar and as well, and they're all around us all the time. And if you don't keep your stuff very clean, that other stuff will get in there and start to work the sugar in the beer, and you'll introduce bad flavors, things that you don't want, mold and bacteria. The yeast, what you want is to have only the yeast working the beer.
Now, when you say bacteria, that kind of could scare some people, I would assume. They may be scared of saying, well, I don't want to get into that because knowing me, I won't pay enough attention to sanitation and I'll get an infection, is what it's called. An infection of some bacteria in there, and I'll make myself sick or my friends sick.
Well, I could understand why people would think that, but the truth is, by the time the beer has fermented completely out, the alcohol in it will basically kill anything in it. So beer, even if it doesn't taste good or is slightly spoiled because bacteria gets in it or wild yeast or whatever, it won't hurt you. It may not taste good. I tell people, if you don't like the way it smells or tastes, don't drink it. But technically it can't, nothing can live in beer that can harm humans. So
the worst that they can get is a nasty taste in beer.
Pretty much, yeah.
Which is pretty bad if you've spent, some time on it.
Exactly. That's the worst problem.
I guess the thing is that good sanitation is not that hard.
It isn't. You just want to follow some simple procedures. Make sure everything's washed thoroughly, soap and water, rinse thoroughly so there's no soap residue, and then use a sanitizer. There's several on the market to sanitize your equipment. Sanitizing doesn't mean sterilization. You don't have to put your stuff in an autoclave. You just want to make sure that it's thoroughly cleaned and sanitized with a sanitizer. And then you can proceed. It is impossible to keep everything out of your beer. So what we want to do is make the yeast the dominant thing that's consuming the sugar in the beer, kind of like sending the Red Army, and they take over the whole thing and run everybody else out. And so even if something else got in there, they don't stand a chance because there's just so many yeast cells working in there and taking up, and they're growing and reproducing themselves faster than something else can, because you throw billions of cells of yeast into a batch of beer to ferment it with. So
it's giving your yeast a good head start.
Exactly.
What are I've got in my head the top 3 questions that people ask me, the top 3 common questions about home brewing, and let's see if they match up with yours. What's your top 3 of people? Oh, you're a home brewer. Here's the question.
Can I make beer more cheaply than I can make it at the store?
That's one. That's one.
Okay. The other one is, how hard is it to do? Is it very difficult?
That's similar to another one.
Okay. And let's see. The last one is, how much is it going to cost to get me into the hobby?
Since you're a store owner, they would probably ask you more. My top 3 are. What was the 5? I've already forgotten the first one. But the second one was, is it legal?
Oh, yeah, that comes up a lot too.
And how much does it cost?
Mm-hmm.
And how long does it take?
Right.
Those are the questions. So let's pick some of those. Pick one of those 5 or 6 questions.
Okay. Well, let's start with the legal question. Let's knock that out. It is legal. Jimmy Carter signed a law now several years ago that basically made it legal nationwide to brew beer in your home for personal consumption and the consumption by your friends. The big deal is they don't want you selling it and getting around paying taxes on it. They really aren't too concerned about you just making beer. They're concerned about not getting their taxes so much.
It's the pocketbook issue.
Each state, though, has the ability to regulate alcohol as well. And so most states, almost all of them now, I think, have basically made the national law, codified it as a state law as well. So I know here in our state, Arkansas, it is now legal to brew the same amounts as it is to brew nationally, which is 100 gallons per adult in the house. So, and 100 gallons is a lot of beer to brew. So.
And I think it's what, a 200 gallon per household limit?
There's a 200 gallon limit, but my guess is if you brewed 215 gallons, the feds won't show up on your doorstep. You would have to be brewing pretty regularly to get 200 gallons.
Well, I figured the other day that if you brew a 5-gallon batch of beer, which is the typical batch, you'd have to brew 40 times in a year.
Is almost every weekend.
That's a lot.
And I know some brewers that brew almost every weekend, so they can close in on the limit. But again, nobody's really watching it. Nobody really cares. They just, it's just the rule. They had to set it a threshold, and that's what they set it at.
There's no sheriff's helicopters.
And we certainly won't call the cops if I calculate that it looks like he's going to brew more than 200 gallons this year. Call the cops. No, we don't do that.
So how long does it take? We don't want to, in this segment, I don't want to get too much into the details. Maybe we'll save that for the next segment.
Okay.
But in generalities, how long does it take to brew a batch of beer?
In general, to brew a basic batch of beer, we're talking brewing extract batch of beer, which is the simplest, easiest way to get into the hobby. It takes a few hours to do the initial process of boiling up the malt, adding the different ingredients, cooling it down, and putting the yeast in. It'll then ferment actively for about a week. And after that, it'll take about 3 weeks for the yeast to settle out after the beer goes still. Then you will add a little bit more sugar and put it in the bottles. It takes another maybe 2 to 3 weeks for it to become carbonated in the bottles. Chill it and drink it, and so you're looking at 6 to 8 weeks. But typically the beer is best about the time you start to run out. So at the end of your 6 weeks, you'll try one. You won't be able to stand it, and you'll get one and put it in the fridge, and you'll try it, and you'll say, well, it's pretty good. It maybe is not quite as fizzy as I like. And then a couple weeks goes by, and you try another one, and you're thinking, wow, that one's really getting good. And pretty soon you've drank your entire batch, and you're saying, wow, now it's really, really good. So typically, I say 6 to 8 weeks is how long it takes from start to finish.
That's probably one of the biggest mistakes that I made when I first got into brewing was that, the book says you can start drinking it 2 weeks after you bottle it. Well, you can.
You certainly can.
But, the yeast is a living organism, and depending on the temperature and the conditions, it's going to take a little while to bottle condition that beer. And, I think we drank the beer in a very short time after that 2 weeks, and I set aside a 6-pack in the closet and just for archiving, and checked it a month or so later, and it was like, holy cow, this beer is now more clear, it's more carbonated, it's much crisper, cleaner tasting beer. And so I encourage people when they're brewing to try their best to hold off for a couple months after they bottle. Because unlike commercial beers, which are filtered, they filter the yeast out. And so, having a freshness date on a commercial beer makes sense, but for a homebrewed beer, staying in the bottle for a little while in your cellar or in a nice, cool, dark place is beneficial.
Exactly. You want the flavors to kind of marry together and have the yeast completely settle out. One of the issues with homebrew is that there is a little bit of yeast in naturally carbonated beer, and that's the way we do it, is we add a little sugar, as I said, to the beer in the bottle, and it ferments again, creates a little bit of yeast on the bottom of the bottle, and you want that yeast to settle completely out and to actually kind of let itself kind of pack onto the bottom of the bottle so that when you decant it, pour it into your glass, you don't get a bunch of yeast in the glass, because while yeast won't hurt you, it has a little bit of flavor, and that's not the flavor we want in the beer. Although some beer styles call for a yeast character in them, some of the Belgian beers do. Most of the time you want it to be clear and free of yeast, and the best way to do that is to simply let them sit in the bottle and for a couple weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, and let them completely settle out. And like I said, also is the flavors kind of mingle together, and over time, their character changes slightly, and so you get a better, more balanced beer after it's sat in the bottle for a few weeks.
And to me, part of the pleasure of homebrewing is that surprise of coming up with something you do your best to produce predictable results, but sometimes you get a little surprise. You get a beer that tastes a little bit different from what you anticipated for various reasons, or you get a beer that matures over time, and it's the discovery of that taste that nobody else has tasted, essentially.
Exactly. And the beer,
it's your beer.
The beer kind of comes into its own eventually. It'll kind of, become, and there is a point, obviously, at which the beer, it peaks, just like a good wine. And the only way to know that is to keep drinking them. So.
Well, listen, Andy, we've about run out of time for this segment, and if you have time, I'd like for you to stick around, and we'll record another segment for
Sure,
for
I'd
the
love
next
to,
time.
James.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
You can visit Andy's store online at thehomebrewery.com. That's thehomebrewery.com. There you can see what the Home Brewery has to offer in the way of equipment and ingredients. And if you want to learn how to brew beer in your own home, you can visit basicbrewing.com and check out our DVD video, Introduction to Extract Home Brewing, where we walk you through the fun and easy process of making your very own beer. We'd love to hear from you. Please send your comments or questions to james@basicbrewing.com or fill out the contact form at basicbrewing.com. Let us know what you'd like to hear in future episodes. Thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. We'll talk to you next time. So long.